Please welcome the Mayor, Freo.
Thanks. Thanks, Graham, and welcome to you all. Nice to see both faces that are familiar and not familiar, which is actually really nice. So it's nice to see so many of you out here. And this is actually this is kind of the first public run we've done on this. We did a launch a week or so ago, which actually went really well. And it was nice to see among some of our key stakeholders as well that there's a lot of interest and a lot of love for Fremantle, because bringing this to fruition is ultimately going to be one of those things that is going to be about partnership. And that's actually what I want to partly talk about tonight, is that one of the reasons we've done this and taken what ultimately, and I hope for those of you who are involved in the visioning process that you'll actually see many of your ideas actually illustrated, because there's some nice illustrations in this as well. But it's actually taken those ideas from the visioning process, from council debates, and actually started to put them into one document that we can go to the private sector, to the state government and to others who we want to partner with and say, this is where we want to go as a city over the next 14 or 15 years. So this journey started with this document in many ways, and it's a nice analogy to start with, because it's a document which has something just starting to break through the soil, break through the surface, and it feels like over the last 5 years or so since we've did this strategic plan that we are starting to finally see ideas that we planted come to fruition, start to break through. And at the heart of those was a real passion for making Fremantle to draw on what I saw and what the council saw as its legacy. Fremantle, and there's a nice book called As a Place of Consequence, where Fremantle has always been more than just a suburb, more than just a place where people go to sleep, more than just another part of Perth, but actually has been a really significant part of the history of Western Australia. And as a port city, as Perth's second city, has been a really key part of that history. What the council was really key to do was make sure that strategic importance actually flowed through to its future. So that meant ultimately it was going to be more than a tourist town, more than a dormitory suburb, and actually was going to continue to be a place of commerce, of vibrancy, of life, of a 7-day-week economy, and a place where things happen, a place of consequence. This is divided into two parts, this presentation. The first part I want to kind of recap the journey for the last 5 years, and then that flows into where I want to see us go over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So one of the first things that we did a few years ago was start to change our planning scheme so we can actually get some of that vibrancy back into Fremantle, get people living and working, playing back into the heart of Fremantle, starting with the East End, the area that's surrounded in red there. And it'd be fair to say that entrance to Fremantle via the car yards is not one that anyone has loved in its current form, and it's kind of looked like that. In fact, it's another great photo which I probably should have included 40 years ago, which actually almost is exactly the same photo, just in black and white and kind of some pretty cool 1970s cars. So one of the first things we did was actually change the planning in this area, but also upgrade the streetscape. And this is what it looks like today. And as those trees grow, we actually start to see some of those developments, such as the heirloom development, others start. And of course, we've started to see the first of those seeds popping through in relation to elements like this cafe down in the east end of Fremantle, which for the first time has people starting to actually use this really great end of town. And of course, the heirloom project as well, which is really exciting. In fact, I was speaking yesterday to some of the people involved, and that project is about to kick off this month. So finally, after all this time, in terms of actually getting into build phase, which is really exciting. Reuse. That's going to be 183 apartments in that beautiful old building. The next, and perhaps more controversial stage for those of you who were around Freo a few years ago, was Amendment 49, where we actually looked at upping the heights in the core of Fremantle, in the city centre. We took a really key approach then around doing that, what we saw in the less attractive parts of town, where the Queen Street, where the Myer, Target, Coles, kind of 1960s and 70s parts of town, and actually upping densities to encourage major redevelopment of that area. So that passed through, and they had some really key targets around getting another 1,500 people living in the heart of Freo, but extra 70,000 square metres of commercial floor space, extra 20,000 square metres of retail, which was really key. I thought this was a good forum to give you a quick update as to where we've got to with some of those. So our targets, I mean, it's amazing to think is that a few years ago there was 820 odd people living in the Fremantle CBD, which is pretty extraordinarily low. So we were really keen to quadruple that. through 1,500 dwellings. We've currently have just over 1,000 that have either been DA approved, which is 416, 326, which is actually constructed either underway or completed in the last few years, or another 259 where the plans are being submitted. So you start to see that it's starting to happen now and those things are rolling through. Same with A-grade commercial office space, something that the city had really severely lacked. So a major target there, and this is probably one we're not meeting as quickly as I would like, but certainly some of that 70,000 square metres, about 38,000 square metres of that in the pipeline, or certainly both in construction and DA approved, which is pretty exciting. And finally, retail. Interestingly, Fremantle actually has lost over the last 2.5 decades about 20,000 square metres of retail space, as that's not including the stuff that's not let. So our goal was to put that back because ultimately you need a certain mass of retail to make it work as a core. So, that again, that's tracking pretty well. About 16,000 square metres either DA approved or under construction or underway, which is pretty exciting. We certainly heard this statistic before. We've just updated some of these as well around that $1 billion development pipeline, in which about almost 200 million of that's either under construction as we speak or complete. About 386 million of that has a development application that has been approved, and there's about another 500 million odd which is further down the pipeline and further away. So this is it's a 10-year process, but one which we're starting to see gather speed, which is pretty exciting. And I'll go through some of those in more detail, but there's certainly been a bit of a sense over the last few years that Fremantle, it's at least is a place where people are looking to invest again, and that's at the heart of it if we're actually going to get some of that vibrancy back into the middle of Freo. The major one for that end of town especially, and I think this was, it's pretty ambitious. So the council actually owned this block, and we'd slowly bought up the different parts of this block over time until we owned the whole 10,000 square metres that it sat on. And 5,000 square metres, sorry. So it's 5,000 square metres, and then ultimately that which we then could sell as a block to one owner, who's obviously now doing the Doubletree by Hilton Hotel. We contacted them recently to see how they're travelling. Obviously they've just demolished part of the site, and they're telling us they're going to demolish the second half, the car park, and start construction in May, which is exciting. And of course, tourism is actually where Fremantle is working. It'd be fair to say that, and I actually find this an interesting statistic. I wouldn't have thought this, but certainly Tourism WA tell us that outside of the Perth CBD, Fremantle is by far the most visited tourist destination in Western Australia, and one of the fastest growing as well. So with 1.2 million visitations a year, and certainly well above second is Margaret River, followed by Kings Park, which I think is kind of interesting around. So that's certainly one which is our strength, and one which I think we need to keep growing on, and I'll talk a little bit about how we can keep growing that as well. Another point, and this probably came out of some of the debate around local government reform, where there was a big debate around local governments and how sustainable we were and all those kinds of things, and there was certainly a fair bit of mud thrown, which we did our patient best to ignore and let go to the keeper, but it's certainly around debt and those kinds of things. And I wanted to put this up because what this clearly shows is that Fremantle's cash reserves are about $35 million, our debt's about 10, and what's really important about that in terms of these transformative moves is that puts us in a very strong position as we go forward. I mean, having basically a position where we have really strong cash reserves to actually deliver these projects. So obviously they're going to be delivered in partnership. We're not going to do them by ourselves, but I want to make it really clear that Fremantle's in a very strong financial position to be able to actually go and do this. And that means it also has meant that we've been able to deliver a wide range of projects over the last few years, from obviously Queen Victoria Street, which I spoke about, the Esplanade Youth Plaza, the Old Port project, a range of these, the upgrades to the Fremantle Leisure Centre. I mean, I think this has been a really fantastic success, and one that I think that it'd be fair to say is loved by the whole community. It's a year old now, which I think is pretty amazing. A year goes quickly, and one that continues to be loved. The Leisure Centre went through an even more expensive upgrade. We spent $1.6 million on the Youth Plaza. Spent I think close to 5, was it Graham? Yeah, all up. On the Leisure Centre, $5 million, including doing a combined geothermal cogeneration, so it's much more sustainable energy now powers that, but also upgrading the pools, adding disabled lanes and access and those kinds of things. And then of course actually telling the story. That's a lot of it when I go out beyond Fremantle's boundaries, a lot of it is that there is this ongoing story that, that Fremantle's dying, Fremantle's not doing very well. And I think we have a great story to tell, and that's actually part of our challenge, and partly why we're doing this project, is to say actually Fremantle's actually got the fantastic bones of a city and can do it even better as we go forward, and actually if we build on our strengths, and that's partly what we're doing today. So that was actually what part of the Fremantle story. Certainly you've seen those branding around, which has been run, and the banners and those kinds of things, which has been really exciting. So thinking forward as we go forward to 2029, what we did with this is take the ideas that came out of you, the community, the council, other direct engagement with stakeholders, and say, what are some of the key changes that we can make over the next decade and a half to actually transform Fremantle? So I'll go through each of these, from the city centre to the waterfront, how we connect Network City transport-wise, the northern gateway around the Fremantle traffic bridge, and the Fremantle Oval Hospital precinct as well. All of those, put them together, and actually I think make a pretty exciting next few years. So I imagine a few of you might have come across the river from North Fremantle over this, the old traffic bridge, which is certainly one which the Main Roads Department have often said, it's ready for a replacement. And the plans that they put forward is to actually put a new bridge in between the rail bridge and the old traffic bridge here. Now, instead of though knocking down this old traffic bridge, I think there's a really exciting opportunity to actually create a northern gateway for that part of Fremantle that will actually better connect North Fremantle up with that new emerging eastern precinct, the east end of Fremantle. So we talked about that higher density residential quarter where the car yards are at the moment, and we've got a lot of interest emerging around that Queen Victoria Street precinct, which I think will be, we can get 2,000 to 3,000 more residents living in that part of town, which I think is really important. One of the things that Fremantle lacks is housing diversity, getting a real mix of housing types into that part of town, again activating ultimately the city centre core, because everyone was in walking distance to the train station back into Fremantle. You've got Cantonment Hill and the Army Museum, which is an incredible asset, and one that we're working with the community in that area, but also more broadly on actually starting to get that reused and reactivated, which I think is really exciting. And then of course this huge potential around what happens when the traffic bridge is replaced. So obviously you're going to have a lot of people, and one of the things, as you've got lots of people in higher density, we need to make sure that we provide great green places for them to meet, places for them to recreate as well. And obviously you can see that it is actually pretty well, when we've got Fremantle Park in this area here, but actually taking the old Fremantle traffic bridge and doing something like New York did with the High Line is an amazing opportunity for that area, and not one that's that radical. Ultimately, that's no longer, it passed its use-by date for having trucks and buses and heavy vehicles running over it, but reusing that for was primarily pedestrians and cyclists, and actually having places for people to linger over the river, looking down towards East Fremantle and up towards the port, is a pretty extraordinary opportunity, and one that I think is very, very exciting. So that whole precinct is one that we'll be certainly working with government on as those changes happen, and I think will be very transformative. So for those of you who didn't arrive from the North Face, many of you would have come past another, shall we say, less than loved part of Freo, which is kind of this bit between a very vibrant Cappuccino strip and a great Ray Avenue precinct. We've got these two really, and they kind of got this dead space in between where the hospital is and the synagogue and a few other kind of pretty unamazing places. But there's a real opportunity here. Now, there's an opportunity is arisen for two unfortunate reasons, and to be honest with you, they haven't been very good for Fremantle. One is the Dockers are moving their training ground out to Coburn, as you'll be well aware. That's going to happen probably early 17 or 18, 17. So that's an opportunity there. And then of course, recently, in the last little while, with Fiona Stanley opening and at Murdoch, we have another huge opportunity with the hospital being downgraded, still a hospital, but actually having a lot of much more vacant space within it that can be reutilised. So that means for the first time we can start to connect all of this up, the Fremantle Oval, South Terrace, the hospital and the prison, to actually start to create a fantastic precinct around here. Some of the key changes that we're looking at doing in this area, which I think have got a lot of potential, of course, is the old Stan Riley site, which is a past its use-by date single-storey development next to the synagogue. But actually we're looking at doing a medium density, mixed use, so ground floor shops and commercial uses, but above that, accommodation. And at this stage, where the council has been working with providers on that is a combination of for seniors, but then also for students, because we don't have enough of either of those things in Fremantle. And so getting affordable housing is one of our key goals for this site as well. But also starting to get a much better connection through to the prison, because the prison is the only World Heritage asset that we have in Perth. And we have it right here in Fremantle on our doorstep, and getting those connections and celebrating that is a huge opportunity. As is the Knoll, which is a beautiful old building here, starting to link back through to those and having a really exciting activated precinct. The third move is this area here. I'm assuming people recognise where this is. You want to have a guess what year this photo was taken? So it's actually more recent than you think. It's about 1985, 1986, around about that period, just before the America's Cup, before it went through a major facelift. But you can see that the beach is almost not present down on Bathurst Beach. So obviously you've got the roundhouse right here, the J Shed, and ultimately you've got the new Bathurst Beach House and area just over here. In fact, even Bathurst Beach House has gone through a pretty major transformation in the last few years. Feels like a whole lifetime ago that was the McDonald's, doesn't it? But it's be fair to say, but that area now is, for the first time in my memory, and I think probably a long, long time, for a lot of Fremantle's history, really working as a place where people want to go. And for me, that's been a really exciting change. And that's, again, the people who redid the Bathurst Beach House have done an absolutely fantastic job, and the council did the new boardwalks and the old port project, which starts to interpret a really important historic area. In fact, this is where the first flag was planted in terms of settlement, which will be in 2029, will be 200 years. So and for Fremantle, this is one of its great opportunities that we've never, for me, is exciting because we've never really realised it. But we're absolutely surrounded by water. We've got the river, we've got the port, we've got Bathurst Beach, we've got the fishing boat harbour down to South Beach. But we don't. When you're here, you don't feel like you're close to the water. We've never connected to it properly. So one of the key things, and this actually came through really strongly in the visioning process, was actually connecting through to the water. So starting with Bathurst Beach, actually starting to make those links from the new Bathurst Beach House, ultimately up to the J Shed and through to Victoria Quay is going to be absolutely key. So drawing people down, and what that does as well is that it strengthens the West End, because as people come down from the city centre, from the Cappuccino Strip through to the Bathurst Beach, it starts to activate those key streets in the West End, which I think you start to see High Street coming back to life recently, and that's really nice to see. And I think it's a long way to get all the way to the Roundhouse, which is what we need to do. The other really key one, which I'm really excited about, is starting to connect through the Esplanade Park down to the water. And one of the key elements of that is the extension of the Esplanade Park. So at the moment, all this is car park. Here's the youth plaza there. It's actually connecting Norfolk Street all the way through to the water, to Muse Road. One that increases legibility, often trying to find your way to Fishing Boat Harbour. There's a special skill for, I think, people who live in Fremantle know how to get around. Everybody else, I think, always feels slightly lost. So actually start creating some of that legibility through, and then actually we're working with the Italian club who are situated here to actually get some car parking on that site, with probably the Italian club above, and actually where we still actually probably increase car parking, because it's actually a good spot for a car park, but at the same time increase the size of the Esplanade Park. Esplanade Park's grown 20%, I think, probably every 50 years or so. And it's a good opportunity to actually do that again. The last time was in the 1970s where the area where the skate park was added back then. So for me, there's a fantastic and really exciting potential here. The old port jetty, the long jetty, reinstating that, possibly an ocean pool, either in this or another location down on the harbour, and ultimately extending both the fishing boat and the sailing harbours potentially, as of course, making sure that the impacts on South Beach and others don't happen at all. So there's some really great potential that we can do there, and for me this is actually a really exciting project as we start to reconnect to our water. The final part is around actually how we reconnect through to the port, because again, it'd be fair to say that it's a really tricky and really poorly done at the moment. Everything on the other side of the railway line is currently managed by Fremantle Ports. and they've gone through a major process. But one of the things that I'm excited about that's coming through this process is for the first time to get the passenger terminal back connected to the city. And that's going to be absolutely key. We have 50 cruise ships arriving this year, this financial year, with 40,000 passengers disembarking. Now at the moment, those passengers arrive in what could only be described as one of the least attractive places, as you arrive in this car park with a long walk to anywhere. And it's really, there's a huge amount of potential here to actually shift the cruise ships so they're actually much closer to the train station, have a really clear link back to the city, because we have a lot to offer in that regard, and we're just not making the most of that opportunity at the moment. So we're certainly talking with the ports about that process at the moment, and then also even the clear links then from Victoria Quay back into the West End, again, not particularly attractive at the moment, but you can start to see, this is approved plans that we've done with Fremantle Ports about actually extending Cliff Street alignment and bringing that legibility and that connectivity back. And of course, Victoria Quay itself. In fact, these plans are currently with the West Australian Planning Commission, this is a plan which Fremantle Ports have been driving both with the Public Transport Authority and the City of Fremantle to transform this area here, which, it'd be fair to say, is where you park your car but you don't linger any longer, into one that actually may want people to actually spend time there and be an attractor in itself, which I think is a really exciting project. So, and this will be a major development. So once the ports go to market on this, and this is in the area of about $300 million ultimately, down in that regard. The city centre. Now, what we've talked about in many ways has been the areas around the city centre. And in many ways, what's been an interesting phenomenon, I think, of Fremantle of the last decade and a half is that the areas around the Fremantle city centre have really thrived. I mean, there's no doubt that South Fremantle is probably the most, got the best buzz about it ever has in its history. Same with North Fremantle, George Street. You've got these precincts all around Fremantle that are really coming to life. But I think this Fremantle city centre hasn't followed that path, and one of our key goals is to start to connect up those precincts to make sure the city centre really works. And a lot of that is about getting people obviously living here, as I spoke about earlier, but also people working here and making it a really attractive place for people to visit. At the moment, when you arrive in Fremantle via the train, it'd be fair to say that once again we've managed to do a very spectacular job of making it not very attractive. And that's, you kind of dodge some buses and then walk across a series of what feel like pretty open, exposed and unattractive areas. And that, as you can see, there's a lot of concrete there. So one of the things we've been working with the PTA on as well is them moving that bus port to the north so we can create a new city square right in front of the train station that would look like this. As you can see, it's a major traffic calming, and then so the buses instead will come down here. So you've got this, the other, for those of you who catch the train, that's the other entrance, which will go straight to the bus port. It makes a lot of sense, and then all of a sudden you can start to imagine then how those connections through to Victoria Quay all of a sudden start to be a lot more attractive and actually start to draw people through the city in that regard. Again, and this is another really big opportunity from this. At the moment, you only end up on Queen Street if you got lost, I think, because it is a really unattractive streetscape. But what that does, moving that bus port, it actually then, for the first time, opens up Queen Street as an attractive in that area. This is where the areas where we gave the most density bonuses. In fact, the site, this site here to the right can go to 10 or 11 stories. It's a major development site that's recently been purchased, and the plans are underway for a major development on that site with a combination of retail, car parking, and basically it's a really great mix of uses. And I can't say too much about that yet because it's not public, but when it comes out, I think it's the one that I think will potentially transform that whole part of Fremantle, which is, and for the first time start to make Queen Street work. At the heart of all this is, because Queen Street obviously has to link up to something. At the moment, as good planning almost is like getting dumbbells with great linkages in between. So, and at the heart of Fremantle, it's King Square, our town square, has never really worked. So for the first time, we've done a proper plan, a coordinated plan, so with Serona, who own the Myer building here, and the city, who own these buildings here, a coordinated plan actually starts to link up the Fremantle markets, which is a huge attractor, with the town square, with Queen Street, with the train station, and ultimately back around to the Cappuccino Strip, which is a really important way of actually starting to make the city legible as a core. So these are some of the very latest images from Kerry Hill. You know very well that Kerry Hill architects were the winners of the international architectural competition that we ran. And this is a view actually of where we're sitting right now through that. And obviously the new library with the grassy mound and the library, and ultimately council chambers and new combination of office and ground floor activation, kind of food and beverage in that area. And the town hall sits down here. So, and this is just to give you a bit of a sense of that. And I know there's been some debate in the local press around the library in recent times. I think Kerry Hill have actually come up with a very thoughtful way of designing what will be a light-filled, pretty amazing space. So, and one that's over double the size of the current library. But it's not just the square. There's actually also areas like the Spicer site here, which again, not the most attractive site, but again, where there's actually some pretty stunning architecture. This has already been approved. This DA has already been approved by the council and the design development assessment panels, and as has the Queensgate cinemas, which are currently unlettable, will be also absolutely transformed. So it's a pretty exciting time for the city centre, where obviously there's that eternal question, which I think is a very legitimate one, as to where's this up to. There's been a lot of talk about this for some time now. It'd be fair to say we've been working very hard with government on this, and we have said to government that they are still being very open and saying they're absolutely committed to moving a government office down here. It's certainly taking longer than any of us would have liked, but we are pretty confident that we will have a response from them probably in the next 2 to 3 months. So that's certainly a commitment that we've got from them, and one that we'll be holding them to, because I think it's about time that if this project doesn't go ahead in its current form, then we've got a plan B that we will run out and do. But either way, this project will happen in one form or another. Now, the final bit, of course, of this is about how do you tie all of these parts together. It's one thing to have great precincts. Ultimately, great cities only work when they have good transport links between those precincts. So making Fremantle a livable, walkable and accessible city is absolutely at the heart of it. This actually links in very much with the council recently passed its integrated transport strategy, which goes into this in a fair bit more detail, but actually having a core that is low speed, a walkable core. In fact, it'd be fair to say that I went to a fantastic talk by the Lord Mayor of Melbourne last week, and he had a wonderful quote, which he said that no city has ever thrived by aiming to attract more cars to its core, as cores should be where pedestrians are. And this is actually the strategy that we've taken. But in Fremantle, this is not an anti-car strategy. In fact, it's about making the core really pedestrian focused and a really legible, accessible, simple way of parking on the periphery. In many ways, it's not genius. It's actually what the shopping centres do every day. They make you park on the periphery and you walk into a very walkable core. In many ways, but Fremantle gets to do that with a really special heart to it, in this heritage heart that's legible in the very same way. So that's basically very much at the heart of it. But then it's also about how we link to the areas that are beyond that. So it's about actually at the heart of our strategy here is around actually getting a more balanced mode share, where we want to see more people on public transport, more people on bikes, more people walking, but also making the car available and easier for those who are going to use that. And light rail is going to be absolutely key. And it'd be fair to say there's been a very interesting debate over the last few days around light rail, where government is fair to say is prevaricating on whether to go down this route or not. And this would be also fair to say that this is probably one of the longer term parts of this project. I mean, I'll be upfront, so I can't see this happening for the next 10 years, but this is a 2029 plan. I can see it happening sometime in the 2020s. I actually do think that, and the council's role in this is really important, because what we're doing is we're locking down a light rail route, one where it's ready to go. So when, for the first time, we get a state government that supports it, with the funding behind it, the council, they won't be spending their time debating with the council about how this goes. we'll be actually ready to say, well, we've already got it here, it's been mapped out, and we can actually roll it out as quickly as possible. Because this will be a transformative project. And there's a few reasons for this. One is, to our south, in Coburn Coast, we have 10 to 15,000 more people just south of South Beach. We'll be moving into that precinct. Now, we can either try and attract them all to Fremantle by riding their bikes or driving their cars, or we can actually provide them with a really accessible, easy public transport system. They're only a few k's to our south, and that's the kind of catchment we need to make Fremantle more vibrant. In a similar way, we're going to have 30,000 people working at the Murdoch Activity Centre where Fiona Stanley and Murdoch Uni are. Now, again, we want a really clear transport route for them down South Street where they can actually link into Fremantle, which will actually be a really good way of starting to link up with the economic centres of Fremantle with the economic centre of Murdoch. So that's actually why we've embedded this, and that is certainly a long-term goal, but one that I think we will see come to fruition. And this is at the heart of the Transformative Moves document. These are not all things that the council will be able to do by itself. Many of them we can, and many of them we will do, not in 15 years' time, but actually over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You'll see many of these things happen. But what we are doing is mapping out a clear vision both to the private sector and to government about about where we want to go as a community, building on the visioning and building on engagement with our stakeholders, which is really exciting. So when you put it all together, looks like a guitar playing whale, but I think you can actually see how all these different bits from the northern precinct around the train station, the city centre, the oval and the waterfront all start to tie together for what I believe will be a major transformation of Fremantle. So to finish off, I think this is where we were 5 years ago. This is probably where we are now, where things are starting to take root. We're starting to see major things start to happen. But ultimately, this is where I keep coming back to the point of partnership, where the role of this is not something the council will deliver by itself. It's something that we will deliver in partnership with a range of others. And that's actually one of the key reasons we put this out, so everyone knows where we're going and we can all start to take that journey together, because that's the only way that revitalisation really takes root. And there is some of that really great partnership happening, and I just give Future Freo as a nice example of that, where we've actually got the private sector putting their hand in their pocket and actually funding some really important research into Fremantle and to where it's going that will actually help us make our decisions, but also help them and the state government make theirs, which is really important. Thought that was a nice slide to end on. Australia Day this year for the first time, and I think Fremantle is an amazing place, and we see lots of that extraordinary moments like these when it is a place where people want to be. What I think this Transformative Moves document makes that possible more often, more regularly, and actually in a way that I think actually will become the norm rather than just a place of special events. So thank you very much.